It is official. Algeria is the launch export customer for Russia's Sukhoi Su-57 Felon combat aircraft. It was announced by Algerian national media on the 11th of February 2025, and it was confirmed by TASS on the 13th of February. You may say, well, it had to be expected, Algeria is a Russian client state. Well, no, not really. According to the official news, Algeria has purchased 14 Su-57E, where E is the variant for export. This was expected. When the Russians announced at Zhuhai Air Show in November 2024 that an export contract was signed, they did not reveal the customer. Algeria, however, was at the top of the speculation list because of the long story of acquisition of Russian weapons. Despite the lack of surprise, this contract is having international resonance. It has been featured by several media outlets, and I use Ground News, which is sponsoring this video, to make sense of the coverage. Ground News is a website and an app that gathers related articles from more than 50,000 sources around the world in one place, so you can compare how different outlets cover the same subject. Every story comes with a clear breakdown of the political bias, credibility, ownership, and then headlines of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. So a very interesting feature in Ground News is the blind spot. On this page you find stories that are covered disproportionately by one side of the political spectrum. So if you consume media that are mostly of one side, you will entirely miss stories that are covered by the other side. This is very important to have a balanced view of the current news landscape. And if we have a look at the story that we are discussing in this video, you realize that it has been covered just from the right side. This is a typical case of bias, and you can't avoid this situation if you don't use a tool like Ground News. Ground News is very important for my research since I try to be as factual and unbiased as I can about something that often is neither black nor white. If you sign up through my link, you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use to get unlimited access to all the features. I think Ground News is doing a great job, and I hope you'll check them out. Please support the people who support me. The Su-57 doesn't need an introduction. It is the Russian 5th-generation combat aircraft in service with the Russian Air Force, and its peculiar design is familiar to aviation enthusiasts all around the world. There are literally hours and hours of content on this channel about the Su-57. So Algeria purchased 14 aircraft of the E variant. It is not entirely clear what will be the difference with the Russian aircraft. Some are obvious, like the language of the aircraft documentation, tags, flight computers and other instruments, or eventually the use of imperial units rather than metric. Less obvious is which capabilities won't be provided to the Algerians. I personally suspect that the hardware will be the same as the Russian aircraft. There will be some software limitations, particularly when it comes to sensor fusion, electronic warfare, and the capability of engaging targets either in terms of range or in cooperative engagement. The first deliveries are planned for the end of 2025, with the entire program stretching to 2028. Some sources report that the planned delivery for 2025 is 6 aircraft, which seems quite a lot for the Su-57 standards, but even just 2 will have some important implications. Actually, this entire order has important implications for the Su-57 well beyond Algeria. The first and quite obvious is that if the Russians believe they can deliver aircraft for export, then the production is not suspended. In 2024, there have been news in the Western generalist press. The aircraft production was reported suspended because there were some German components missing due to sanctions. Well, this was never true. The story originated from a leak of commercial documents about 2 years old, in which 2 contractors that are part of the Su-57 supply chain were communicating about some German computer boards that were required as spares for workstations that are used in one of the Su-57 testing rigs. So it wasn't a critical aircraft component, and probably the Russians have found a workaround by now. It's a testing workstation, not rocket science. The production numbers are not in the public domain, but the consensus is as follows. 1 unit delivered in 2020, it was supposed to be 2, but one crashed during the delivery flight, which, well, wasn't a good omen. 3 units were delivered in 2021, 6 units were delivered in 2022, 12 units were delivered in 2023. So, at the beginning of 2024, there were 22 aircraft in service. 2024 was sort of a pause, when just 4 or 5 aircraft have been delivered. And this makes a total of 26 or 27 aircraft currently in service as we speak. The Russians never confirmed the numbers being produced, but the total should not be too far from this number because one single regiment in the VKS is equipped with the Su-57, so should be about right. You may wonder, how do I know? Well, it is enough to check the Russian sources too. There is much more information in the public domain than you would expect. I usually make all the sources I use available to channel members and patrons, so this could be a good opportunity to start supporting the channel, if you can. Please do it only if you can. Another implication is related to different export markets. India, at the beginning of time, was part of the Su-57 program, but they abandoned the development when the Russians and Indian requirements diverged, and the Russians were not so keen to share the technology. 15 years later, everyone grew up, and the two countries are now in negotiations to see if the aircraft could be a viable interim solution for India. The Russians are willing to share much more now, possibly, to the point of establishing a production line in India. It is clear that having another foreign operator is going to improve the Russians' card in the negotiation. But there is a further implication. The very fact that the Russians are willing today to share what is considered their top weapon system with other countries means they do not consider it so critical now. This is probably due to the fact that the next generation is in development. We have seen some facts, like the flat nozzles, or some hints from Sergei Bogdan and other officials that something else is brewing. We don't know what, but we will see soon. One possible consideration may be that since Algeria is a Russian client state, they have placed the order to make the aircraft look good on the export market and sort to please the Russians. Client state? Well, let me tell you a story. In the late 90s, the Algerian Air Force was starting an important process of modernization. They were acquiring MiG-29s, Su-24s and Su-30s, and Yak-130s trainers. Among various types of aircraft, there were 34 MiG-29 SMTs. This was a variant dedicated to air-to-air and deeply modernized from the first generation with multifunction displays, a better radar, enhanced range, more thrust and other improvements. Deliveries started in the early 2000s and the aircraft were physically flown to Algeria. All seemed well and good till when the Algerians noticed something. The aircraft were falling to pieces. We don't know exactly why, but those aircraft were assembled with a very shoddy workmanship. Some aircraft were introduced in the service nonetheless, and they started having all sorts of problems. Obviously, the Algerians were not happy at all, and heated negotiations started. The result was that the contract was cancelled in 2008, and the airframes already delivered were returned. And Russia sold additional Sukhoi 30s to Algeria, basically at a clearance price. Is this something that a client state would do? In your opinion? I personally don't think so. True, Algeria has historically relied on USSR and Russia for most of their military capabilities, but this doesn't mean that they are a proper ally. In fact, Algeria, since its independence in 1962, has always gravitated in the area of non-alignment and neutrality. Despite this, they had their own share of international issues. Without going into too much detail, which is beyond the scope of this video, the Algerian Air Force has been involved in the war of 1973 against Israel. They fought a civil war against an Islamic movement in the 90s, and they have an enduring conflictual situation with Morocco. The Algerian Air Force is or has been deeply involved involved in these operations, and the current force design is influenced by this experience. However, the Algerian strategic analysis is also influenced by the recent events in the nearby countries. They had a front seat during the Western operations in Libya in 2011, where they have seen what an air campaign could do to an unprepared force. More recently, in 2021, there was a large training exercise involving the United States Air Force and the Royal Moroccan Air Force. The scenario featured two imaginary hostile countries, both located in Algerian territory. The Moroccan Air Force is undergoing a process of modernization, acquiring F-16V, the latest and most modern variant, and upgrading those already in service. Moreover, Morocco has important ties with France, which elicit colonial memories in Algeria. In fact, the Moroccan Air Force routinely conducts joint exercises with the Armée de l'Air. You may understand how Algeria is uneasy, and this is the reason why the Algerian Air Force is undergoing an important modernization process, and the Su-57 order is part of it. Currently, the Algerian Air Force operates about 200 combat aircraft. The number varies actually depending on the sources. I am including in this total the training jets too, because they all have some air-to-ground capabilities and they still have a place in a theater like northwestern Africa. The hardcore of the Algerian Air Force is a fleet of 63 Su-30 MKE. It is a Sukhoi 30 variant designed specifically for Algeria as a multi-role heavy and long-range fighter. It is quite modern, the first were delivered in 2007, and it is a relatively advanced Su-30 variant. The noteworthy elements are the PESA radar, which is one of the most powerful in its category in terms of raw emission power, and the cooperative engagement capability, where each aircraft can share tracks and missile support with any other, and others can come in passive and fire their missiles at the target from unexpected directions. Quite interestingly, the Algerian Su-30s also feature some French avionics as cockpit components, but obviously not in the combat systems. The other main combat aircraft is the MiG-29 with 36 units in service. It is a mix of MiG-29S and SMTs. These are modernized variants of the old MiG-29, but they are still aircraft designed in the 90s. They are currently outclassed by the F-16s in service with Morocco, but they still fly and they're still reasonably good defensive fighters to free up the Su-30s from the point defense mission. The attack and penetration role, together with reconnaissance, rests on the shoulders of the venerable Su-24M. There are 36 aircraft in service. These were mostly acquired during the 90s, when they were already dated. Despite being quite old, they are still valuable for their capability of using guided standoff weapons and for reconnaissance. There are rumors that Algeria has already shared a letter of intent with Russia about the acquisition of the Su-34, but so far nothing reliable has emerged. There are also 43 L-39 and 16 Yak-130 trainers. These have ground attack capabilities, even if their main mission is, of course, pilot training. In fact, the Algerian Air Force has always focused more than other African air forces on training. They're not shy about sending their pilots abroad to train with other air forces, but they have their own schools and their own pipeline to produce pilots. And in fact, one of the question marks about the Su-57 program is how this pipeline is going to be managed. Algerian pilots are already training in Russia, but it is not clear how training will be managed when the aircraft will be delivered. And now that you make me think, how are they going to fly in? Through the Mediterranean, over Africa? Are they going to deliver them by sea? It will be interesting to learn. And it is also interesting to notice that 6 Ilyushin 76 tankers are in service. Algeria is a big country, it is almost 2,000 kilometers tall and about the same wide. Moreover, most of their territory is empty, devoid of infrastructures and airports. Having long-range aircraft like the Su-30 and some tankers is a must for them if they want to provide any measure of coverage over their borders. Many Western designs that tend to be quite short-range won't be suitable for this reason alone. So as you can see, this is a flight line that relies heavily on Russian technology. But it is noteworthy that Algeria deploys a small number of Western designs, but in very important roles. For example, the medium-weight transportation is covered by the Hercules C-130H. The electronic warfare role, even more intriguingly, is covered by 6 Beechcraft 1900. I found no details about the equipment of these 6 aircraft, but it would be really interesting to understand something about them, and if you have any information that you can share, please feel free to comment below. But this is not everything. Various American and European aircraft are also available as light transports, utility, maritime patrol, and VIP transports. So, as you can see, it is true that Algeria relies heavily on Russia, but they're not a client state. It will be interesting to see how the Su-57 program pans out, and we will probably have some more exciting pictures of this beautiful aircraft. Even if you don't like the Russians, it is impossible to dislike their aircraft. I mean the aesthetics, obviously, and the maneuvers, also the maneuvers. Okay, you know what I mean, okay? Okay. Thank you very much for watching this far. It was a privilege having had your attention. Before closing, let me say a big thank you to my friend Andrea Gaspardo, who helped me with the background research. You can find Andrea on LinkedIn. His work is definitely worth a look. A gigantic thank you to all those who are supporting the channel on Patreon by being a member, on GoFundMe, or by any other of the means available. I bring you all in my heart. And if you can't support the channel financially, which is perfectly fine, do it only if you can. Please interact with the video, leave a comment, hit like, subscribe if you haven't. Many people who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I don't understand why, and eventually hit the bell so you will be notified every time I publish a new video. So, this is the end. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.